Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Holden. I'm the president of the Wolf Moose Foundation. Thank you for showing up here on a nice Tuesday night, a chilly Tuesday night, at least where I'm sitting in Michigan. Tonight, we're having our third and final seminar on wolves of North America. And so we've had two other seminars previously with Doug Smith and Kristen Bresky on the wolves of Yellowstone and the ghost wolves of the Gulf Coast. And tonight we've got Rolf Peterson, one of the co-leads of the Wolf Moose Project in Isle Royale. He's going to talk about the Isle Royale Moose. And before we jump into that, I thought I would give a quick description on the Wolf Moose Foundation. We're a relatively new nonprofit, kind of the fundraising arm of the Wolf Moose Project. We've been around since 2023. And basically, the foundation was put together to broaden the financial basis for the project. A lot of different grants from the federal level, especially, are getting more difficult to come by here. And rather than wait until all of that money dried up, the main scientists for the project decided to try to do something about it. So the foundation's been in place since 2023. And we're trying to put together programs and fundraising campaigns to get the project and keep it on a nice, solid financial basis. And these seminar series is one way for us to attract new members and donors. And for those folks who are new, thank you for supporting us and showing up. But we also are doing it because this is a very nice way to say thank you to the supporters we've had longer term. And this is something that basically you can only see if you're one of our donors here. So again, thank you everybody for supporting the project and donating money. Before I turn it over to John Vucetich, would also like to mention that we would like to thank Michigan Tech University and the College of Forest Resources and Environmental Science for helping us put these seminars on. We would not be able to do it without their help and assistance. And a reminder, everyone, that this is being recorded. And at some point, we will post these and let our members, our donors, and supporters know that they can see this, as well as Kirsten's presentation, and those will be online. And also, as the presentation is going on, if you get questions, please put them in the Q&A button. It should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. And at the end of the talk, we'll curate those particular questions and bounce those off of Rolf and go from there. So without any more dilly-dallying here, I'm going to turn it over to John Vucetich, and he's going to give a nice little presentation or introduction to Rolf. John?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. As Jeff had mentioned, my name is John Vucetich. I'm a distinguished professor at Michigan Technological University, and I've been involved with studying the wolves and moose on Isle Royale for quite some time now, but not quite as long as tonight's guest. Rolf Peterson is going to be speaking with us tonight. He began studying wolves and moose on Isle Royale more than a half century ago, in 1970. And over the years, all the time they've spent there, he's been in the business of creating, I'll call it common knowledge. You know, it's the things that we all know. But the funny thing about common knowledge is that we didn't always know it. Somebody had to discover it or observe it and then show how common it is and how important it is. I'm going to give you 3 examples very quickly from Rolf. He's going to probably share with us some more. You know, the idea that wolves tend to kill weakened prey, like the young and the old? We didn't always know that. And in Rolf's work, especially back in the 1970s when he was first getting started, his observations are what really cemented that idea. There were some suspicions that was going on, but Rolf let us know for sure that's how it is, and it's been shown many, many times over in many different places. Another idea, trophic cascades. That's the idea if there's a top predator, it might have an impact on the prey. In other words, prey that eat vegetation, and the vegetation might be impacted. So there's this kind of leapfrogging from one level to the next, from predator to prey to vegetation. Now that's a very common idea, again, known as a trophic cascade. It had been understood for some time to occur in marine systems and aquatic systems, but for a long time, it was thought maybe they don't occur on land because nobody could find one, even though a bit of looking. And then in 1994, Rolf, working with one of his PhD students, Brian McLaren, described the first trophic cascade ever documented anywhere in the world on land. And since then, we now know that they're quite commonplace. I'll give you just one more example. It's my favorite, really. in the 1960s, when people thought about predator and prey, they were trying to figure out what causes the balance between them, the balance of nature. And it was thought it was all the interactions just at the biological level between the predator and the prey. Now, some of you who know Rolf, I certainly know him well enough to know this, Rolf has quite an obsession with snow. And for a long time, he thinks about snow, measures snow, holds it in his hand, plunges measuring sticks into it, drops things into it to know how dense it is. And he was really, this is to me remarkable. He's the first person that really drew our attention to how it is that weather and climate can affect ecological systems. Like, how could you imagine that we didn't know that one day? And Rolf really is important for kind of showing the whole world how important that stuff could be. And now it's a mainstay of ecology. I could go on, but I think you get the idea for the kind of ecological brilliance that we're in the presence of this evening. And I think without any further ado, I'm going to turn it straight over to Rolf. There you go, Rolf. It's all yours.
Thank you, John. You'll be happy to know that I spent an hour today snowshoeing. Well, thank you all for coming this evening, and thank you certainly for your support of this research. I should mention right away in this title slide, John, of course, and Sarah Hoy, they do the heavy lifting. I mostly try and be useful and spend as much time in the field with an assist every now and then. There is an important elephant in the room, and Jeff Holden has mentioned it already. So I enlarged the logos of our supporters so that you could really see them. There's two important federal sources of support, National Science Foundation and the National Park Service. We will see how they fare in the next few months in terms of their support for science overall. And then the Wolf Moose Foundation, Jeff Holden has mentioned, and I'll return to that at the very end of the program. Isle Royale is a little emerald jewel in the middle of a vast body of blue water in Lake Superior. It's got several attributes which make it a really important observatory. It's an island far enough away from the mainland and surrounded by frigid water so that only about a third of the mammals on the mainland have gotten to the island. For large mammals, though, the important ones are moose, wolf, and beaver. And so that's a very simple system, and that's an important additional characteristic. The animal populations are stuck on Isle Royale. They can't really emigrate or immigrate in any large numbers. So the arithmetic is easy, counting and interpreting counts from year to year. You worry about births and deaths and not animals coming and going. And finally, the animals are truly protected from human activities. Not only because it's a national park and all harvest is prohibited, but the isolation in Lake Superior and the fact that it's not even inhabited by people for 6 months of the year makes it a truly unusual place. So the hard facts of the research and the awe-inspiring complexity and beauty of the place should instruct us on how we might achieve a more appropriate role in nature for ourselves. The long-term numbers of wolves and moose are all over the map. I should introduce right away this notion of historical contingencies. And the idea is simply, well, not simple at all. The idea is that events come around at us, at all life on Earth, actually. Events that are unanticipated, unpredictable, and in many cases, totally unimaginable. And they have profound impacts on life of all sorts, and they have long legacy times, lasting months, years, maybe millennia in some cases. One of the most important, of course, would be 65 million years ago when an asteroid hit the Earth and opened the door for evolution of us mammals. A little closer to home, the COVID pandemic of a few years ago would certainly qualify. You can Google search that word in Isle Royale, and up will come a couple of papers recently by John and Sarah. The bottom line, I guess, in terms of a take-home message would be that the notion that we can't predict what's ahead we can really only hindcast and try and explain the past, should make us humble in the face of trying to plan for our activities on this earth. Nevertheless, we do take charge. In maybe most cases, we think we're in charge. The most recent one would be when it comes to Isle Royale wolves and moose, the restart of the wolf population in 2018 and 2019. The big historical contingencies, the big events that have affected wolves on Isle Royale. The first one was the huge drop in that red line in the early 80s was when 75% of the wolves died from canine parvovirus. Second one might be the arrival of an immigrant from the mainland, immigrant wolf, and I'll talk quite a bit about him. So what I'll spend time on tonight is what led up to this wolf translocation, emphasizing a couple key wolves, especially this immigrant. The methods we'll just briefly go over. They're very similar to what Dave Meach developed beginning in 1959. The wolves and moose are counted from fixed-wing aircraft in the winter, and the summer season involves citizen scientists called Moose Watch volunteers who comb the island looking for evidence of moose mortality, and this is an important source of information, which is eventually weaved into our population estimates of moose, pardon me. Emphasize again the uniqueness of Isle Royale as a place for wolves to exist. It's certainly the only national park where wolves are truly isolated from human persecution. And national parks are supposed to be the places where humans have very little effect. But in actual fact, wolves that live in national parks wander outside of those parks, and they're subject to all the kind of harm that is done to wolves throughout most of their range in the world, even today. But not at Isle Royale. These wolves are really totally isolated from us in most important ways. John mentioned the selectivity that's inherent in wolf predation. I won't spend much time on this, but this illustrates the point. I think this was a 15-year-old cow moose. Wolves showed up. She kicked at them with her right rear leg only. And I think at that point, wolves knew they had a good one. Her left hip was severely arthritic. She panicked and ran downhill and was killed in just a matter of minutes. That is atypical. Most moose are simply not vulnerable to wolves at all. Okay, I'll try and outline the rest of the talk very simply, concentrating on two wolves. We'll spend most of our time on male 93. This sometimes called the old gray guy. Was an immigrant from the mainland, came in 1997. But he was undocumented as an immigrant. In fact, we didn't realize he was unique at all until a couple of years, 2 or 3 years after he died. By then, we had developed a technique where we could track individuals using fecal DNA. And we realized, wow, there's this rich history involving this newcomer who totally overhauled the entire population, initially with a genetic rescue, because he brought in new genes to reinvigorate what had become an inbred population. So this was annual report in 2001, one of the first photos of him with a native population female, with whom he very successfully mated and had three batches of litters. So this effected a genetic rescue, which really saved the population. He became white when he was older, and we weren't even too sure at this point because we hadn't done the DNA, the pedigree from DNA work. We weren't even sure it was the same wolf because this guy really turned quite white, and he was quite large, but we still didn't appreciate his uniqueness. And frankly, it didn't even occur to us that it could be a wolf from the mainland. Amazing now. When he initially mated with a resident wolf female, they had very successful litters of pups, shown here. And then the last year we saw him, 2006, he was quite gray by then, whitish underneath. By then he had spent 5 years mating with the second female of his career, which turned out to be his own daughter. And you can probably start thinking, oh boy, this isn't going to be good. And they did have over 20 pups in those 5 years. Seems like a success, but none of those pups ever reproduced. And that really spelled the beginning of the end for the population as a whole. His final year, 2006, that's his daughter trying to rouse him. By then he's at least 11 years old. And maybe he'd had enough, but he wasn't present the next year. But it was only 2-3 years later when we realized the whole history of his time on the island. Even by 2008, we hadn't done this DNA pedigree yet. There were 30 wolves or so present in 4 organized packs. Yet the moose population had tanked. It was down around 500 animals, very low. And I remember thinking, how is this going to end? I mean, the wolves can't just keep rolling at this high number when the moose are mostly gone. Little did I know that within 3 years, all of these packs were either gone or severely compromised by inbreeding. But in 2008, things looked normal. Births and deaths didn't look too unusual. The East Pack, which had been in existence for a long, long time, seemed to be just fine. But the very next year, we found the alpha female dead. This is she. She was radio collared, mortality mode in early May. And we went to her signal and found her having gotten out of a den in an abandoned beaver lodge. She died giving birth to 8 pups. One of those pups had been born alive and crawled out of the den and died. The other 7 died before birth. This is really an unusual situation. Sherry Asa, who might be in the audience, took another shot at trying to find other cases of this. And we aren't aware of anything like this happening in wolves. Certainly not in the wild, and even in captivity. No other similar cases. And even in breeds of domestic dogs, the circumstances seem quite different than what we saw here. It's noteworthy that all 8 of these pups had spinal anomalies, which is kind of a characteristic of inbreeding that we'd seen in every Isle Royale wolf since 1994. It's important to note, I guess, that she had mated with her father. She was inbred herself. So perhaps that's not too surprising an end, but we were still shocked by this bizarre ending for this pack. I'll take you through the ending of one more pack, which is perhaps a little more easily followed. The Paducah pack was founded in 2007 by a brother-sister pair, direct offspring of M93. And they had 2 pups in 2007. Everything looked normal. The male and female in the front here, they look almost like clones of each other. They're brother and sister, of course. Within a year, 3 of these wolves were gone. And the last time we saw that male, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. He'd just been chased for several miles by another resident pack. His tongue was hanging out. He was beat, but he did survive. But that was the last time we ever saw him. So that pack disappeared. And the third pack disappeared. And finally, we're down to just one pack of wolves, which I will return to after we go through a more intriguing, perhaps, effect of old male 93. And that was his effect on the entire ecosystem. When he took over and produced pups in the middle pack, and then produced pups that dispersed into all the other packs and began breeding, his genes took over the entire population of wolves. Predation rate soared to the highest level we'd ever seen in 50 years. They were killing up to 20% of the moose every year. So the moose population really declined dramatically. And this became a classic trophic cascade. Predation was up, moose were down, and then vegetation responded, in many cases with a startling recovery. So in the 2000s, this is just another statement of the amazing predation rate, which he seemed to initiate across the entire island. When you're in the middle of something, it's hard to know where you are sometimes, but in retrospect, this was really quite remarkable. And it had profound effects on the vegetation. John's introduced the notion of trophic cascades, of course, and the initial work was with balsam fir, which you see in this image. This is at Hay Bay in 1974. These are balsam fir trees that are 30, 40, 50 years old. And they've been totally suppressed by moose browsing and unable to grow into trees. After M93 and his kin took over in the first decade of the 2000s, moose were reduced to this historic low. And this same patch of trees in 2012 showed remarkable recovery. I mean, this is just amazing. And these trees, well, this is sort of characteristic of the entire island, actually. I'm not going to spend too much time on terrestrial trophic cascades because it's sort of old hat by now. But I do want to talk about aquatic trophic cascades. Introduce, first of all, the fact that moose spend a lot of time underwater. And the only existing footage of a moose feeding underwater we shot 20 years ago, but it's still the only existing footage. This is an underwater remotely operated vehicle, which we managed somehow to place in front of a moose feeding underwater. So it's a little yellow submarine. A couple of things worth noting. Moose has its eyes open. It's pretty non-selective though. Seems to eat anything that's down there. It's not blowing bubbles because the curious anatomy of the moose's head, its nose, involves this complicated musculature and ligaments which allow the moose to close its nostrils. You and I can't do that, but a moose can. An adaptation for aquatic feeding. The moose was quite unafraid of this little yellow submarine in front of it. The danger is always above water, so it surfaced every now and then and looked around for danger. We were starting to get a little concerned about what it might do to this $20,000 piece of equipment, which we'd borrowed, but we were certainly unable at this point to direct the outcome of whatever was going to happen. So moose may get more than a third of their annual protein intake from aquatic plants. So it's a really big deal for moose. In the end, this moose just kind of wandered by and let our equipment be, which was fine with us. So late 2000s, by 2010, remember the moose population is extremely low after years of very high wolf predation. And I saw something going on in Lake Ojibwe, one of the named lakes on Isle Royale, a large lake, 3/4 mile long, 1/4 mile wide, and it was absolutely covered with plants. I didn't even know what the plant was, but I had a lot of help figuring it out. And it was overtaken by a native floating leaf plant called water shield. And it was everywhere in this lake, up to 6 feet deep. And after talking to limnologists and aquatic ecologists, trying to figure out what's going on, we left with really just one idea, and that was the reduced moose population had allowed water shield to thrive. The green, what you see in this satellite view is all water shield. A little more of an introduction. It's a highly edible plant. If you're a beaver and a moose, even if you're a human, you'll find it in salads in Southeast Asia. I still haven't eaten it myself. I suppose I should. It's a very unique plant, able to outcompete all the other plants because the way it grows. It's got tuberous roots, fibrous stems, leaves that float on top and shield out all the light for the other plants. It's covered with a slimy biofilm, which wards off the bacteria and insects and other algae that might compromise the plant. And it's absolutely delicious for beaver and moose. A little bit more about Lake Ojibwe. It's a very old body of water. It's really just a rain puddle, an evaporation pond with no inlet, no outlet. In 1930, when the first aerial photos were shot of Isle Royale, it did appear. And in fact, this is a very old body of water. A good pollen record dates back to 8,500 years ago. And water shield, which has a distinctive pollen grain, was there 8,500 years ago. It's been there ever since. It had major peaks in 1,100 years ago and 900 years ago. And we don't know much else that was going on then, except there were people there. Paleo Indians mining copper and subsisting on fish in the summertime. But Lake Ojibwe was there. In 1930, when this photo was taken, Adolf Murie was doing the first scientific study of moose, and he was appalled at the effect of moose on particularly aquatic plants. And you can see in this photo the moose entry point into that lake by the yellow arrow. You can see trails of moose crisscrossing this water body, eating everything in sight. But then by mid-century, 1950, a little bit after, beaver came into the picture. This was one of their major reemergence after over a century and a half of being largely absent because of the fur trade, which reduced beaver almost to extinction early in the 1800s, late 1700s. Anyway, beaver dammed up Lake Ojibwe, killed all these white birch. And we'll return to this notion of white birch. So take a good look at birch in 1960, a photo by Durward Allen. And then advance forward 60 years, 2010, moose discovered this emerging plant, the results of this trophic cascade, and they just gobbled it all up. Roots, stems, leaves, flowers, everything was edible. And they were able to outcompete beaver because they eat in Lake Ojibwe. Some measurements were taken that show moose actually eat 10 times more than beaver in this body of water. Well, it took moose just a couple of years to discover Lake Ojibwe, and then they accumulated in larger and larger numbers every year. You'd see as much up to 15 moose at one time, up to 30 different moose in a day. And then the system fell apart because wolf genetic collapse occurred. The wolf population itself collapsed. Moose increased as soon as wolves died back. And within 10 years, moose increased fivefold. And basically, they ate all the water shield. But they kept coming back every year and totally degraded this water body. This is probably what it looked like in 1930 when Adolf Murie was tramping around Isle Royale. The open waters of the lake looked like open sewer. The shoreline was just a muddy wallow. I didn't have any idea where this was going to end up. I certainly couldn't have predicted what would happen next. And I guess I'm trying to figure out why I'm obsessed with this story. I guess it encompasses the important interactions of moose and wolves and beaver and vegetation, all in an interesting narrative. that has continued to fascinate me. But in November 2017, probably there was a very heavy cloud burst, localized precipitation, didn't show up on any of the weather measuring equipment. But anyway, the beaver dam, the main beaver dam that holds back the lake broke and the lake drained, exposing 3 large beaver lodges to wolf predation. By this time, there's only 2 wolves left on the island, but wolves really like catastrophes that affect their prey, and they showed up in less than a day after the dam broke. And a remote camera caught the sole male left on the island. His sides are bulging out. His stomach is packed probably with beaver, and he's carrying a juvenile beaver in his mouth. As he scent marks, as the only remaining male on the island, but you got to maintain those scent marks. And 4 minutes later, the female came by, similar stomach bulging, and they cleaned out the beaver. Apparently ate them all, or they dispersed and disappeared from the system. And what was left, oops, pardon me, was left the next spring was a vast mud flat of organic ooze that had been accumulating for 8,000 years. So there's about 5 meters of organic ooze in the bottom of Lake Ojibwe. And actually several moose died after getting stuck in this ooze within the next year or 2. But finally, plants took advantage of this landscape and developed into a fairly rich, interesting community of semi-aquatic plants. And in the lower right, there's those birch trees that seeded in. So perhaps an indication that the system could return once again to the way it was half a century ago, with birch trees that might eventually give beaver a foothold to continue this process. But again, the future is totally unpredictable. I do have time to talk about another individual, female 67, lesser known perhaps than the old gray guy. We called her the Cinderella wolf, because she had a very dramatic beginning, and yet she left an important genetic legacy, which carried the population right to the end and may have extended its lifespan for a decade or so. In the year 2000, in February, we came upon this site, which was a lone wolf, apparently a lone wolf, being beat up by the resident Chippewa Harbor pack, or pardon me, by the resident Middle pack. Turned out to be a female. This is female 67. She had paired up a few days before with a male, and the Middle pack had caught them and killed the male. And then they tracked her down a couple days later, chased her for 6 miles until she finally took refuge in Lake Superior. This is ice water. And we came upon this scene, certainly the most dramatic thing I've ever seen. For an hour, we just circled overhead while the pack beat up on this poor wolf, who was just shaking whenever she could stand up on a rock. She was just visibly shaking. In the middle of this pack is male 93, that other important wolf. And when I look at all the slides, there's a hint that there was a big male who was not really participating in the attack so much as just kind of being in there, but wagging its tail occasionally and just watching carefully. It turns out this was a female in heat, and that's of interest to any male, I suppose. So male 93 and female 67 are both in this image somewhere. She's important because she's the last breeder on the island who was not a direct descendant of male 93. And So she didn't suffer from the same severe degree of inbreeding that his offspring did after second or third generation. And 2 generations later, over 10 years later, the last female left on the island was her granddaughter. And she was patrolling the east end of the island with the grandson of that same wolf. So here we have the last 2 wolves on the island, a male and female, and that's good. But they were brother and sister, same mother from different litters. They're also father-daughter. So this is just a disastrous situation, if you can imagine what inbreeding can do. And so in 2014, these 2 wolves were still alive with their mother, who was a daughter of female 67. That daughter had just 1 eye, but she was still pretty functional, and she did not want her daughter to mate with her son. And they did anyway. Produced a pup in 2015 in the winter that was visibly deformed. Had a very crooked tail that was banded in a very unusual way. It looked like a little hunchback, and it didn't survive past that 9 months of age. That was the last time this female allowed herself to mate with her father and brother. So for the last 5 years of their lives, they stuck together, but she would have absolutely nothing to do with that male come breeding season in February. So that was the effective end of the population, and introduced the problem of, for the National Park Service, of what to do next. Finally, it became clear to everybody that inbreeding was a major hazard for this population. And it was also pretty clear that without wolves, the moose population itself was capable of destroying the forest of Isle Royale and producing an ecosystem that was unrecognizable, at least in terms of our historical experience. So after several years of study and debate, the National Park Service in 2018 signed a record of decision and moved very quickly, together with a lot of very helpful collaborators, introduced wolves from 4 different areas of the mainland. The idea being that right out of the gate, they would try to increase or maximize genetic variability to try and extend the runtime for this population, given that climate change might continue to erode the ice bridges that have allowed wolves to come over to the island and renew the gene pool. So that was done. 19 wolves were brought in quite quickly, and they were allowed to self-organize and took over the island. The last 2 wolves held out, maintained their own territory at the east end of the island until late 2019. The male, who was over 10 years old, was involved in a fight with other wolves and died of injuries. And he was recovered after death, and the female probably died about the same time. So, but the new wolves had taken over, organized as they do, and there was a lot of killing even of siblings of each other as they were organizing. But now there appears several years later to be about 4 breeding packs, and the population is up over 30 again, and moose population is heading down as expected and anticipated. So I've got plenty of time. Jeff has introduced the Wolf Moose Foundation. It may have more importance in the months and years immediately ahead of us. If you haven't taken advantage of your opportunities to voice your opinion on the direction of the direction this country is going, you might want to try that. you don't know what I'm talking about, you better come out from under your rock and start paying attention. But thank you to all of you who have supported this work.
Rolf, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Rolf and Jeff, if you listen closely, I think you can hear a din of applause through the internet. And so thanks so much for that. That was awesome. We have some questions from some folks. Some questions I actually got earlier today by email.
Good.
And I'm going to ask you the question that has been asked most frequently,
Okay.
also asked most frequently of me today. You may know that yesterday the New York Times reported that dire wolves were cloned, and there's two of them, I think, alive somewhere in the northern tier of the United States. What do you think is the value and purpose of doing so, or what's your reaction to all of that?
Yeah, I wasn't even going to read that, but my wife said, you better read this because somebody might ask a question. So I did read at least the New York Times. Obviously, we can do it. Should we do it? I don't know. I mean, it's an intriguing notion of pulling extinct genes essentially out of organisms and putting them into modern day creatures. At a very modest level, Kristen Bresky, a previous speaker, is proposing to do this in the case of the Galveston Island coyotes, which have a fair number of red wolf genes in them. And that's probably an easier case to figure out because you've got essentially coyotes with red wolf genes in them already. The red wolf is virtually on the edge of extinction. Could you increase the significance of those red wolf genes and maybe produce a creature which is more of a red wolf than a coyote? I can certainly see the value in doing that. The formidable challenge of resurrecting extinct animals when they have no place to go on Earth is much tougher, and I don't have a total answer to that. I am intrigued by the whole notion of being able to do it. It's just as a biologist, wow, that's really cool. Tasmanian devils, or Tasmanian tiger, another extinct mammal, totally unique. But there are skins and skeletons around, and undoubtedly some genes that could be put in another marsupial, maybe the Tasmanian devil, and produce something. I don't know. I really don't know. It's enormously expensive. And is that the best way to spend dollars that could go into conservation for truly endangered species? I think I tend to put my money there first, but the Noah's Ark notion that you could save genes and reincorporate them into living things is also pretty intriguing. So I'm on the fence. I really am.
Well, I do agree with Rolf in a really important way. I think the best thing that could come from this, because of all the attention that be drawn to it, is to really crystallize the question: what are the priorities of conservation? Because that's far from settled, and this definitely raises questions about like what's really important and what's of secondary importance. A couple of questions that are related, Rolf, from folks in the audience. What's your opinion on monitoring the population with respect to genetic variability? And the population is maybe expected to continue decreasing, this one writer supposes. When is it expected that wolves might need to be brought to the island again in the future?
Yeah, that really depends on the details of genetic interchange. Sexual reproduction does jumble up genes, fortunately. And of course, I'm speaking out of almost total ignorance. The person in the office next to mine is Kristen Bresky, who's handling the genetic analysis for Isle Royale wolves, based primarily on fecal DNA, but also on blood that's taken from living wolves that are captured by the National Park Service. Let's see. So she's in charge of charting out as much as possible the genetic history of the population. I should back up, I suppose, and mention that the 8 wolves, I believe, that came from Michipicoten Island basically took over demographically the island, and genetically they swamped all the other genetic combinations. So the notion of mixing all these genes up from 4 different areas didn't pan out quite as intended. Michipicoten wolves dominate the population. I think all the wolves have the same maternal grandmother. There was a brother-sister mating right out of the gate. When a Michipicoten female mated with her brother. My own interpretation of this, and can't read into a wolf's head, but she had her brother, and she had also a couple of males from Upper Michigan that were potential mates, but she outweighed those Michigan males by 20 pounds or more. She'd grown up with a big father. Her brothers were all big. Why would she choose a little male from Michigan? So I don't know. But anyway, she mated with her brother, and so there was some inbreeding right out of the gate. So it's an interesting situation of a population that's quite small, just a few breeders already on the track of inbreeding. But it really the harmful effects of inbreeding will depend on just which genes are recombined, and that's really hard to predict. And so maybe the population has a 20-year run, maybe a 30-year run, maybe one new immigrant will come in on a rare ice bridge 10 years from now and run it for another 10 years. So the future is totally unpredictable demographically and even genetically.
Yeah.
So it argues for strong monitoring of genetic characteristics for sure.
Right. No, very good. And that leads into another question, which is, or maybe even a cluster of questions. When was the last ice bridge able to form? And in the past, like how frequently had wolves gotten to Isle Royale? And given a warm climate from here on out, what do the prospects look like for wolves possibly being able to make it to Isle Royale again in the future?
It's wintertime temperature and wind, which prevent those ice bridges from forming. I mean, even in my visible memory, we used to have ice bridges that would last weeks, even in the 70s. And in the 60s, 8 out of 10 years, there'd be a good ice bridge. 100 years ago, they ran the US mail across the ice with horses and dogs. So things have been deteriorating for a long, long time. Now, if we get 2 ice bridges in a decade, and these would be brief ice bridges, that might be all we can expect. Ironically, we have had 3 ice bridges up of at least a week in the last decade. Last 5 years, it hasn't been much. It takes below zero Fahrenheit temperatures and no wind for a couple nights, and then you've got an ice bridge. But wind has increased significantly, and certainly temperature has increased in the wintertime. So that does not argue for a future rich in ice bridges. But
No.
wolves are opportunists. They love to travel on new ice, and but it's hit and miss for sure from here on out.
No, for sure. And another question is, this past summer, wolves had some uncomfortable interactions with humans, uncomfortable for anyone watching it or hearing about it. What causes that? Why that happened? Has there been any change over the course of the summer, or where do you think the future is of those kind of interactions? And maybe describe them for us a little bit too, what you know of them.
Yeah, there was a pack that developed at the extreme northeast end of the island. They had pups in 2023, and then they had pups again in 2024. But then all these yearlings were running around, and they were living in a place within smelling range of Rock Harbor Lodge. So these wolves, every day of their lives, every place they went, they could smell a greenstone burger. I mean, that is really pretty attractive to a carnivore. So, and they did have a kill, which required them to walk through Rock Harbor Lodge to get to. So the combination of all these things led to wolves exploring Rock Harbor itself, Rock Harbor Lodge, and the people that were resident there, campers as well, for food, and they could find food. People were careless, and it took a while before everybody got on the same on board, realizing now we got to isolate these wolves from any opportunity for feeding. But in any case, they did become almost daily nuisances looking around Rock Harbor and the associated areas for food. So there were almost daily hazing operations by the National Park Service to kind of shoo them away. Efforts to provide secure food storage for people at campgrounds were undertaken, and there'll be more of those this summer with more secure vaults for people to put their food in. So this is sort of uncharted territory, but yeah, the wolves have been habituated to the notion that they might be able to get something to eat from people. And I don't think you can train that out of them. Hopefully you can haze the wolves away from people, but there was a time not too long ago, a 3-year period, 2004 to 2006, when in almost similar ways, wolves became fearless of people. In that case, we didn't really understand why. They weren't obviously getting food from people, but they didn't have any fear of people at all. And this was true for wolves across the whole island. It came rather suddenly, and then after 3 years, it disappeared rather suddenly. And that's still a bit of a mystery. So again, we cannot predict what wolves will do, but it certainly is worth warning people to secure their food. For sure, don't encourage any wolves to forage around people. It's potentially a dangerous situation, certainly.
No, for sure. So wolves have generally been on the increase since they were reintroduced. Moose have been on the decrease. And I know you're not in the business of making a forecast, but you'll be back on Isle Royale in a couple of months or less. And summer is always a tantalizing time for providing clues. What kinds of things will we be looking for this summer to get clues about what's going on during this past winter and what's likely to happen this next winter and that kind of thing?
Oh, I guess we spend a lot of our time in the summer looking at trees. There's a dozen wolves and 1,000 moose and 60 million fir trees. Trying to get a handle on what those trees are doing is important in the summer because we have 1,200 of them individually tagged. So we make a lot of inferences about moose effects on the vegetation from those tagged trees, and they're doing miserably. So even though there's wolves present and even though moose are declining, those trees are still waiting for their place in the sun, and maybe they'll get it, and maybe it's too late. So that actually is maybe my main question: are those poor balsam fir trees actually going to get a little bit of recovery opportunity? Other than that, wolves will reproduce probably 3, maybe 4 litters of pups. So no shortage of reproductive potential. We don't expect moose to be highly visible as their population goes down. Wolves are obviously able to eat most of the calves every year. And I guess if I have one thing on my royal bucket list, it's to see if history will repeat itself and see that moose population decline again to 500 or so animals. In order to be provocative, I could mention, since I think I have time, there are 3 islands where wolves have eliminated their prey. The first one was Coronation Island in Alaska, Southeast Alaska in the 60s, where wolves were introduced secretly, and they pretty much wiped out black-tailed deer. in a few short years. The next one up was Pleasant Island, also in southeast Alaska. And there, wolves again eliminated virtually every black-tailed deer. And the wolves were supported during that, subsidized during that episode by marine mammals, seals, or pardon me, sea otters. Coronation Island, the wolves were subsidized by seals. And then coming closer to home, Michipicoten Island in the early 2000s, I think 2014, wolves got to Michipicoten Island, which had been predator-free, had several hundred caribou, and in a few short years, the wolves killed all those caribou, except for a few that were rescued and moved to another island. And then those wolves, which had been subsidized by beaver, were everybody's candidate to move to Isle Royale because the wolves themselves were starving, with prey only provided by beaver, only in the summertime. So there's 3 intriguing cases of wolves wiping out their prey on islands. So, I'm asked occasionally, could that happen at Isle Royale? I don't think so. I would bet against it, primarily because not only is Isle Royale much, much bigger, 3 times the size of Michipicoten, but you're dealing with a prey animal, the moose, which can very effectively defend itself. They don't need to run and hide. They just stand there, becoming belligerent, and they're carrying their own armor-plated self-defense. So I think that will, I bet, prevent wolves on Isle Royale from wiping out moose, even if they're subsidized by beaver, which incidentally have also declined dramatically. So that's my short attempt to be provocative. Something to watch.
No, that's great, Rolf. And so I think that's all the time that we have. Again, Rolf, thanks so much for taking the time to put together talk and share with everyone. I'm already getting emails from folks saying how much they enjoyed it. And now I'll turn it over to Jeff Holden to take us out.
Yep. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rolf. Excellent talk. And like John, I'm also getting some emails saying the very same thing. So this was our last of 3 seminars for this winter spring seminar series, but it's been very well received, so I'm pretty sure we'll be doing it again. It's more a matter of when are we going to do it and what are we going to have as a topic. But again, thank you very much for your support and for showing up tonight. And on the screen there, Rolf has got the Wolf Moose Foundation URL, as well as information on Facebook, the Wolves and Moose of Isle Royale, and a QR code. So if you have more questions or just want some general information, please investigate those. And again, basically the seminars are both an effort to get new members, new donors, and we've got quite a few of you on the line here. So again, thank you for showing up. But it's also really a sincere thank you for the supporters that we've had. And we're going to need the help going forward. So please stay tuned, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more from us. And again, this is recorded, and at some point you'll all receive an email just alerting you that this is recorded and we've got it available off of one of our websites. So otherwise, thank you very much for showing up, and good night, Rolf. Good night, John.
Hey, now.